Cool. Well, thanks everybody. For those of you at home or in the office, please go ahead and ask your questions in the Q&A. I'll kick it off with one for Nic here. You recently came out with the composition functions going into beta. And we just heard the talk about composition functions from Vision. What's cool about it to you, and kind of where are you planning to take it that should make people feel excited about composition functions?
A comment I just dropped in the chat a second ago, which probably captures what I think is cool about it, is it gives us a lot more optionality and flexibility as to how folks can express how to compose an XR of other resources. As an architect type person, that's something I always like, having flexibility and options available. So for me personally, I'm the kind of person where, when I hear, I want to do iteration, I want to do conditionals, etc., I'm like, great, I want to reach for Python or Go or something that is a language that I'm familiar with as a software engineer. But I know not everyone wants to do that. So the other option is we can build functions that'll let you express this using something like a Helm chart or potentially Q, which I know everyone's really excited about right now. And as I mentioned in chat, even for folks who like patch and transform style composition, we've actually built that now as a function. And one of the reasons that might not be immediately obvious why that's interesting or useful is that it allows us to iterate on that function separately from core Crossplane, right? So core Crossplane is released 4 times a year. If you go and add a new patch to core Crossplane, let's say in early November, you'd be waiting until January until that gets released. And you're waiting on, core Crossplane maintainers to review it and all that kind of stuff. So by just decoupling the composition logic from the release cycle of Crossplane, we can iterate on it a lot more quickly. We can release patch and transform functionality separately. If you really, really thought you had a good design for iterations and conditional and patch and transform, you can, do a shallow fork, add it, test it out, be like, hey, I've been running this in production for 6 months and it actually works really well. Maybe you should just put this in mainline. So it just gives us a ton more flexibility is my short version.
Yeah, I think I'm also really excited to see what people start to create, because I think it'll be a lot easier to share those composition functions that folks build rather than their kind of more bespoke patch and transform work. So I think as that marketplace grows, that'll be really interesting to see. Ezgi, I know you've been doing a lot of work with secrets and Vault and Crossplane. Can you tell me a little bit more about that work that you're doing on secrets management?
Sure. So when you create a managed resource, it usually comes with a bunch of details like IP addresses, some username, passwords maybe, and most of the time those additional resource-specific information are sensitive. So by default, Crossplane and providers stores those information in Kubernetes secrets. But if you want to use Vault, if you want to use a more centralized secret store, then right now we are supporting Vault plugin to write those secrets to Vault whenever you are provisioning any resource. To be able to use that, we are installing a Vault plugin, which is basically a gRPC server, and it knows how to talk with Vault. Once you configure it with your external secret store, you will be able to use the new API called publish connection details too, and you will be able to store these additional information in Vault based on your path and RBAC and any additional security configuration.
And Ezgi, sorry to go off script a little bit here. I did some of the docs review on that. It looks like that isn't just Vault. Like Vault is one implementation there, but it looks like that plugin system could plug into any secret store. Is that right?
Yes, definitely. Currently, what we have is only Vault, but you can easily implement the API for any external store you want and just create a gRPC server based on it and use it.
That's awesome. I think that's going to be really powerful as we build out that community and create more of those. People hate the term best practice, but best practice operational components. Bob, I wanted to ask you. You've been involved with the Crossplane community for a couple of years. You mentioned how has Crossplane impacted the work you're doing at Nokia? Is there anything you're working on that you can talk about and share on how Crossplane is being used?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk at a high level. So we started. I started in Crossplane about a year and a half ago. We had spent the previous maybe year or so it completely in Terraform, doing all of our cloud orchestration, all of our infrastructure in Terraform. And then somebody mentioned to me, "Hey, have you looked at Crossplane?" And at least for me, kind of the light bulb went off. And I was like, yeah, this is exactly what we've been trying to do for the last 2 years, and I wish I had known about Crossplane a lot earlier. Um, just the ability to um, define the APIs that we're looking for, the reconciliation, and I call it encapsulating the complexity. Um, Taking the content of our Terraform modules and mapping that into compositions, um, which can then be easily reused. I mean, yes, you can reuse Terraform modules, but I at least find it much easier to reuse composites within Crossplane than I do reusing Terraform modules within Terraform. Um, and so it's kind of revolutionized, in my view, the way we maintain and develop environments. We also do a lot of things with procedure documents. We might have a 100-page procedure to do something, and we'll take that, 100 pages of manual steps and automate it as much as possible into a composition. And now you don't have problems with manual, you know, you still have problems. You don't have problems with people making mistakes, um, as part of executing a 100-page procedure. So it's really been, in my mind, revolutionary in terms of the way we can create abstractions, the way we can hide complexity inside composites, and make them reusable across all areas of the business.
That's awesome, Bob. And again, coming from that networking background, I have kind of a unique perspective on some of this infrastructure as code, automation, whatever you want to call it. That um, I don't know if you can talk about it at all, Bob, but there's that whole concept of running an agent to provide enforcement, but you generally have these platforms that can't run agents because they're embedded systems and routers and switches, and so you end up doing something like a Terraform or an Ansible where you push once and hope for consistency. And I think that's one thing that's super powerful about Crossplane is the ability to force that consistency. And again, in networking and in a lot of infrastructure, our troubleshooting is a state machine. There's a flow chart there. If you can build to that flow chart, you can drive down your time to resolution on incidents, really, really low. I love to hear that y'all are working on that. Another one for you, Bob. What has your journey, you said you're a big Terraform shop. What has your journey to Crossplane looked like? To the extent you can talk about that, what are some of the biggest obstacles you've had?
Yeah, I mean, the journey's really been kind of an evolution, right? I mean, we were big users of the provider Terraform provider early on. That's where actually I got a lot of my first introduction to the Crossplane community. I started working on the Terraform provider, and we just took a lot of our larger um, Terraform modules and started running them in provider Terraform. And then we would evolve those over time to take advantage of the AWS provider, in our case, the resources that were available. And we ended up with kind of a hybrid model where we had some resources that weren't supported yet in the AWS provider, still in our Terraform. We also use the Terraform provider as, I kind of call it a Swiss Army knife. There's a lot of calculations it can do. We do subnet calculations, for example. We can do conditional resources in the Terraform provider that you can't do in Crossplane itself. So it's really been kind of an iteration, an evolution in terms of, we started out still, using Crossplane, but most things were still in Terraform. Today, very few things are in Terraform. And I kind of envision that as we get into composition functions, we can remove a lot of that, calculation work that we're still doing in Terraform. But it's definitely an evolution over time.
That's awesome. Thanks, Bob. And Jared, kind of same question to you. I know that you've been deeply involved in supporting customers, helping folks get started with and operationalize Crossplane. What has been your experience, and what have you seen there?
Yeah, I think that's actually really interesting for me as well because I've been working on building Crossplane and the community and the ecosystem around it for multiple years now. So I've seen and gotten exposed to a lot of people going through their adoption journeys there. It's something I'm actually really grateful for too. Like every time at a KubeCon or some event or on Slack or whatever, just getting to interact with the community and learning from them and their experiences is really quite informative. Really enjoy it. But so there's definitely some patterns that I see with an adoption journey of Crossplane, and you'll see like from some of the announcements we made today that we're seeing those loud and clear and trying to make some investments in it. So I think one of the things that people have a lot of problems with is that Crossplane, it's really powerful. It's expressive. You can do a lot of things with it, but it is challenging. There's a lot of new concepts to learn. The learning curve is fairly steep with it. So one of the things we've done in the last release or so is that we did make a big investment in our documentation. So if you go to like docs.crossplane.io, you will see a much more improved experience there, and a lot more informed content and useful content to get people the answers that they need in a self-service fashion. And obviously, Pete, you were the driver behind that, and so I recognize you. You can pat yourself on the back physically there, and I'll just do it virtually here. But documentation alone isn't enough, right? So on people's adoption journey, you also see them kind of stumbling into, okay, cool, there's all these things I can do, but how do I take that and start building my own opinionated cloud native platform and in a control plane? How do I put these things together, right? And so if you're following along with Bassam's keynotes talk and then a charter update that we made to the project earlier this morning, we're expanding the scope of the project to be more complete and kind of cover all of the experiences and functionality that you may need to build a control plane and manage it successfully. So the biggest thing I could think of there is the whole developer builder experience around it. So facilities and affordances to effectively and successfully define your platform, get it deployed, and figure out what's going wrong with it if it's unhealthy at runtime. Christina's talk was really good to kind of help the current situation and explain how to dive into your platform and figure out how to make it healthy, et cetera. But we should be building more tooling, more experiences, more interfaces, all that sort of stuff in the project itself, so we have a nice complete experience and help people adopt the project more effectively and more successfully.
Jared, does that mean I'm going to get, hey Siri, build me an IDP?
I don't know about Siri, but
well, I have an Android, so I can't say the other one.
Yeah, me fair enough. But yeah, so I mean, I think there's a lot of things that are on the table right now, right? We've expanded the charter of the project, and so focusing on and including developer experience, tools and experience, like just all sorts of things, consoles or tools and automation, et cetera. That's all the things that we want to figure out now. So I've been thinking about this for a bit, and I've got a lot of plans for some tactical things that we want to do first. Like for instance, adding things to the Crossplane CLI to make that useful for diagnosing problems or for helping to define your compositions and all that sort of stuff. So those will be some first practical steps, but I think we should definitely be considering using other sort of technologies to make things even more effective as well.
That's awesome. I'm very excited as somebody who finds myself fumbling around quite a bit. I look forward to being able to write kubectl get broken to see what's going on. I want to open it up kind of to everyone, and I'll start on my screen at the top with Bob. What's coming up that you're excited about? As maintainers, you're in the weekly meetings, you're thinking about roadmap. What do you see in the future that's making you excited about Crossplane, Bob?
Probably the biggest one for me right now is the new composition functions. I think that really, like Jared was saying earlier, you go through all this stuff and you learn all the things you need to learn, and you get to the point and it's like, well, but I can't do loops, or but I can't do conditionals, or but and you really want to take that next step. And composition functions is just going to open all that up. We've even been thinking just some crazy ideas, right? Or maybe not crazy. You can dynamically retrieve the resource template that you want to use from a config map, or from a Git repo somewhere. You can just do so many different things and leverage different sources of information, and yet leverage the Crossplane reconciliation engine, leverage the APIs. So for me, that's probably the biggest thing. The other thing I'm looking forward to is the deletion ordering that's coming up in 1.14. The ability to, we do a great job of creating resources as they can be created, but when we tear everything down, it's kind of a mess. So the deletion ordering is a great solution to that, and just allows you to make sure that things get deleted cleanly. So
That's great. Jared, what about you? What's getting you excited? What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you can see that I have a lot of passion about the developer experience stuff. I already talked about that one, so I'll go with a little bit more mainline answer, let's say, where, if you look at the roadmap of Crossplane and what we've been doing over the last number of releases, we have released a lot of new functionality and new features over 1.11, 1.12, 1.13. And so we have a fair amount of functionality that is useful, powerful, and has, solving real problems for people, but they're still at the alpha level. So, composition functions is an example of that, observability resources. There's a lot of things that are there and present, and they're, the community has started to adopt them and started to use them. But until they get out of that alpha level, they're not really going to be, they won't have widespread adoption in production use cases. So really excited to, continue investing in those. I think there's at least two, composition functions and observability resources that we'll be moving to beta in the 1.14 release, which is late October, about a month or so from now. And so being able to get those features and functionality and capabilities of Crossplane into more people's hands that are either, are risk averse or, waiting for things to, be production ready, et cetera. Getting more widespread adoption of that functionality is something I'm excited about, as boring as that response may be.
Now, I actually think there's a ton of power in the observe-only resources that you mentioned, right? Because then people can import their existing stuff, right? If I created my environment without Crossplane, I can now kind of vacuum that up into Crossplane land and make that transition. So I think there's a lot of power there. And Ezgi, you're super deep in the weeds, I know, on a lot of things. What's, even if it's fully on the dev side, and in the code, anything in the Crossplane land, what's making you excited? What are you excited about in the future of Crossplane?
Of course, functions. Everybody is talking about functions because it's so powerful and there's no limit about what you can achieve with them. But I am also excited that we are kind of trying to have some kind of a structure around it. We are not just going to want to publish it and, okay, guys, do whatever you want. It's the way. We are also trying to come up with a best practices kind of thing. We are also trying to come up with new functions together with the V1 Beta 1 promotion. So I'm really excited about it. It will definitely increase the number of adoptions and the usage of Crossplane.
That's awesome. I think, we're definitely hearing, a common theme here. And I'm just going to go ahead and guess that Nic's thing that he's excited about is composition functions, because that has been, I feel like, the thing he's constantly working on and thinking about. And I assume one of his dogs at this point is just named composition function. Or maybe I think you have two dogs, so maybe one is composition and the other one is function.
I was actually just trying to think of a different answer. So I will say, I think people will be pleasantly surprised. There's been quite a few small performance improvements made in Crossplane leading up to 1.14. So I think that people find Crossplane to be a bit more performant and sort of have less things like conflict retry errors and things like that. So there's just been a bit of polish and quality. Shout out to Stefan, who recently joined Upbound, one of the previous API server tech leads, has been going through and finding a bunch of little bugs like that. So that's something I'm excited about, just sort of making the system a little bit more polished in the coming releases.
That's awesome. We're about out of time, but I do think there was one other question that I'd like to throw at Jared that came from the Q&A. Crossplane is often talked about as replacement for Terraform or Pulumi, but it's reliant on Kubernetes. Can you talk a little bit about that, or what options people have, or how do you? I'm sure this conversation comes up in every customer conversation you have, what is your answer to that?
Yeah, it's a good question because we when we started the Crossplane project, the framing of it was as an add-on to Kubernetes, so it was very much tied to the ecosystem and even like the hosting and deployment model being tied to Kubernetes as well. So I think that something that we saw from that I think is actually quite a good benefit though is that the resource model, the API surface area, the experience, etc. Is kind of dictated by the Kubernetes resource model as well too, declarative, eventually consistent, all that sort of stuff, which I think is a very good thing. And it integrates very nicely and, standardizing on the Kubernetes API allows, very smooth integration with the entire ecosystem of Kubernetes tools. So, policy stuff and, all sorts of things that you can use very easily with Crossplane. That's a nice benefit from it. But I could definitely see a future where Crossplane isn't necessarily, it could act more as a standalone sort of experience, right? Where it's not necessarily dependent upon a Kubernetes cluster to be running and doing its work, but the general shape of the API and the experience there is definitely Kubernetes centric. We're investing further into developer experience stuff. I can also imagine, creating an experience where you can kind of more bring your own language, be able to kind of program or, interact with Crossplane things in a programming language or experience of your choice. And then have that kind of boil down to or under the covers, kind of get to Crossplane's control plane and then in a lot of the ways that it works now, but, building different experiences on top of it. So it's not as myopically Kubernetes. But I think there's a lot of benefits that come out of being built on Kubernetes. But I do see a future where it can run, in a standalone context as well.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jared. And being able to bring your own code, I really look forward to the Fortran composition functions that people are going to build. Really bring us, back to the future, if you will. But with that, I want to say thank you to all the panelists, not only for being on the panel today and helping out, but for all of the work that you do in the community, in the code, in the product. In the year and a half I've been here, it's just incredible velocity, and I've seen the plans and the roadmap, and y'all are out there, rolling up your sleeves and breaking a sweat every day to make the product better and to build this community. And so I just wanted to say thank you. And with that, I'll throw it back to Victor.
Oh, to me, huh? Okay, there we are almost finished. A couple of more parting words. First, this was awesome. I really enjoyed the day. Second, there are swags. So you will get email. You need to fill in some form, and you will get swags, socks, or whatever it is. And the important part is that it does not need to finish right now, right here. We can continue talking in Slack. So go to Slack, slack.crossplane.io. Register if you're not already there. Start the conversation, ask your questions, tell us about your problems, and we're going to try to help each other. And with that being said, thank you all for attending.